Welcome everyone to 3 on 3 Blazers. I am Nate Hanson alongside Jared Cowley, producer Max Barr on the ones and twos, and we have a special guest on today's podcast, Art Edwards, sports anchor, sports reporter here at KGW, filling in for Orlando Sanchez. Art, it's great to have you on.
I'm glad to be here,
but we wish it was under much different circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.
So before we kind of get into everything, obviously the main topic of this podcast is going to be the devastating injury to Jusuf Nurkic. Before we get into all that, we just kind of want to explain the timing and the shuffling of this podcast. It's not going to be a normal 3 on 3 Blazers podcast. Usually, we have 3 questions that we've all answered.
Nate and I argue a lot.
Yeah, Jared and I don't get along a lot. And it's going to be a little different this week because actually before the Nurkic injury last night, we weren't planning on doing a podcast this week because of scheduling conflicts and whatnot. Orlando, who is typically filling the role I am right now, he is in Louisville, or rather on a flight right now to Louisville to cover the Ducks in the Sweet 16.
Yes.
And Jared will be on a flight to somewhere in a couple hours, I assume spring break festivities.
I am headed to join my family in Hawaii.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a nice little getaway.
It'll be nice, yeah.
So
Take my mind off of what's happening here.
Yeah,
Yes.
so we weren't, because Jared and Orlando were going to be gone on Wednesday and Thursday, we were just going to skip this week and come back fresh and ready to go next week.
Yep.
But then, of course, we all know what happened last night. Jusuf Nurkic, the Blazers center, compound fractures to his left tibia and fibula. And there's a lot of, Blazers Nation, we've only had 14 hours to kind of cope with this information.
Yes.
And I guess the question off the top is kind of, Jared, what was your first reaction? You were watching the game live.
I was. Oh, my first reaction was I felt sick to my stomach. Like I genuinely thought I was going to be sick. If you were watching the game, you saw it happen. And they, to their credit, they didn't show any replays, but you saw it happen in real time, and you knew immediately that something horrible had happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's more difficult even than, it wasn't just like some random player getting hurt, which is always challenging. Mm-hmm. It was the severity of the injury. Even before you knew what it was, you knew what it was. And it's Jusuf Nurkic. Mm-hmm. He is one of the most beloved Blazers that I can remember in all my time covering the Blazers. Fans love him. He's one of my favorite players to watch. Yeah. It's not just his production on the court, it's his personality. He's an extremely just fun-loving, gregarious individual who is fun to watch play basketball. And he's playing the best basketball of his career right now. He is as valuable to this team as Damian Lillard, I would say, because of his impact on the defensive end, and he's become a very good and efficient offensive player as well. So all of those things combined, it was just completely demoralizing. And the only time I can remember ever feeling that kind of just pit in your stomach as a Blazers fan was when Odin was injured, when he broke his kneecap in December of 2010, I believe. Yeah. And then the 2000 Western Conference Finals, which I've talked about on this podcast before, when the Blazers blew a 13-point lead going into the fourth quarter of Game 7 against the Lakers and ended up losing. Both of those are memories that I think I'll have for the rest of my life. I'll remember where I was when that happened, how I felt, and this one is exactly the same.
And we've all three of us have had different experiences, how we consumed and learned about this injury. You watched it live on television. Art, last night, you were covering the Oregon State women Beavers as they got to advance to the Sweet 16. Right. And then tell us how the rest of the night kind of was for you.
We were on our way back. We had finished up doing our stories, and filed our report, and we were on our way back, and I get a phone call from the station, which I missed. Yeah. And then I got a couple of texts, and they said, well, are you on your way back? Can you head to the Moda Center? And I said, well, we're not anywhere close. I said, but why? And my initial thought was, because they clinched a playoff spot.
Yeah.
And then I got a text from Orlando and said, you don't know about Nurk? I said, no. And I immediately got on my phone, because I have two, my personal phone and my work phone. I get on the other phone and I see what's going on. And I think, no, This really cannot have happened. And all I saw at that point, I didn't want to look at the video. I just looked at the text that was written, and it just said serious injury and gruesome injury. And when I saw that, I was thinking, okay. Well, in fact, with the photographer I was with, Nick Bieber, we had a conversation about Paul George, because that was the first thing that popped into my head when I started seeing what they were writing about it.
And, I mean, you probably saw the word serious and gruesome leg injury, and you didn't even need to see the video to know what type of injury they were all... I mean, we've seen it now a handful of times. We all knew what that injury looks like. For me, I was actually at the game last night. I was up in the 300 section up high behind the basket where Nurkic was hurt under. And even from that distance, you could see there was something wrong with that left leg. You know, you're way up high, way far away, but you could see something was wrong. And at first, because it took the players a second to react to it, at first Jared Dudley was the first one, I think, who recognized what had happened. And he immediately started running, the opposite way. And initially, I and a lot of other fans thought they had called a foul on him. And that, I mean, the officiating last night was questionable at best. And so
I vowed to myself that I would not talk about the officiating on this podcast.
And so, well, that's a good idea. We know how you get with that sometimes, Jared. But you saw Jared Dudley run away, and my initial thought was they called a foul on him. There were a lot of bodies in there, and then all of a sudden everyone else on the nets about a second later does the same thing, and the Blazers players all go back to their bench, and you knew at that moment the fans in the Moda Center realized something serious had really happened. And they wasted no time getting that stretcher out on the floor, and the air out of the building. I mean, it was an exciting atmosphere. You're in double overtime.
It was such an intense game from start to finish.
It was close the entire way, and it was physical. And like I said, there were a lot of foul calls and non-foul calls made. So there was, it was a real battle, and the air was just gone. All the enthusiasm that was at the Moda Center, it disappeared. And the fans, it was odd. I've never felt such a sad atmosphere at a sporting event. When we go to a sporting event, or no matter what sport it is, it's there to be entertained. We're having fun. Sports are fun. And it's the first time, at least for me, I've been in a situation like that where I was at the game. And it was odd because when they finally took Nurkic off the floor, no one outside, children, God bless children, they don't understand the ramifications of everything. They were still into the game. But every adult in there, no one really cared.
The rest of the game.
The rest of the overtime. I mean, there were people leaving after Nurkic got hurt and before the end of the overtime. And it wasn't because the game had been decided. It was because they didn't care about the outcome anymore. That was, and everyone was checking their phones because, to the Blazers' credit, they didn't show a replay on the Jumbotron there at the Moda Center. And so everyone was checking their phones, trying to either see video or see reporters, what they were having to say about it. And like I said, I've just never been in an atmosphere like that at a sporting event where it's filled with sadness and frustration as well, because it was... The fans, you could hear it on the broadcast. I went back home and watched the end of that game on the broadcast, and you could hear it. You said you weren't going to talk about the officiating, but the officiating was really tight in the first half, and then they backed off a ton in the second half and let a lot of things go. And the fans, at first with their sadness, let out frustration. There was a chant
with the officials.
And there was a chant of "these refs suck" for a good minute out there on the floor. And that was just frustration because everyone understood what this injury, the magnitude of this injury was.
Yeah, I can kind of building off of that with the sadness of the fan base. For me, I mean, I was at home watching this game, and my family's in Hawaii, so I'm in my empty house with all the lights off. I'm the only one there, and I'm watching this, and I am alone in this. And that's, I needed someone to be able to connect with, to be like, what just happened? To experience that sadness with someone else. And to Blazers Twitter's credit, they were good last night. Like, there was appropriate reaction across Blazers Twitter, just expressing extreme sadness for Nurkic, and it was. Nobody cared about the result of the game anymore.
No one cared that they clinched the playoff spot.
Nobody cared about that, and there was talk about how I don't care about the rest of the season or the playoffs right now, and I think that will change.
Yeah.
But I think that's a natural reaction in this moment. Is that the only thing that matters right now is Nurkic, and it's not even that he's hurt and now the Blazers are, going to be missing their second best player for the rest of the season in the playoffs. It's that Nurk, the person that we've all come to appreciate and love, suffered a gruesome injury that we all experienced in one way or another, and it was just something that you felt. And so for me, it was good to have that connection on Twitter, of all places, on social media, to be able to experience that with other people who are feeling the same thing I was feeling at the moment.
And I mean, it's not just the fan base who feels that way. It was the locker room, the players after the game. I mean, Damian Lillard last night talked about he talked about Nurk the person more than Nurk the player. He talked about their relationship and how he can get on Nurk a little bit harder than probably anyone else on the team because of the deep connection and personal bond that they have. He talked about how the other day Nurk went over to Dame's house just for Dame Jr.'s birthday. Nurk is an extremely likable figure.
Yes.
The Stumptown commercial. Everyone knows that.
That was a story that I was kind of emotional last night, but that was a story that got me choked up, and I may have shed a tear over that one.
And I mean, everyone, this is going to be tough. It's not only tough for the fan base, but it's tough for the team as well. But one thing a tough situation like this can do for you is unify the team. And we'll see how the Blazers carry on.
Well, we will. I mean, this is a team that is close and tight. All the guys are around the same age. They seem to have a real closeness already, and I know it really did affect them. I mean, they were talking after the game as if this game didn't really matter.
Yeah.
We're okay, great, we made the playoffs, but it doesn't even feel like we've done anything like that. And what concerns me really at this point, Nurk's recovery. How does he come back from this? But how does it affect the franchise moving forward? Because really, people have been started talking about this as we have a big three.
Yeah.
It isn't just the big two of Dame and CJ. No. We have a third, and now we are a legitimate threat to go deep into the playoffs. Yeah. And it really it changes obviously the dynamic for this year, but even down the road, because we're talking 8-9 months
at least.
Best case scenario.
Yes.
And that's the other thing that kind of hurts about this is that we've all seen the strides Nurkic has made this past season. I mean, a year ago on this podcast, Jared and Orlando and I were debating on whether it's worth re-signing Nurkic in free agency, and now that seems insane.
I can't even imagine that we had that conversation.
I mean, he was on track to potentially be a borderline all-star type player next season.
Yep.
And, I mean, he's only 24, and he's proven he's a hard worker, he's dedicated, he's driven, he's committed. But you never know with these type of injuries. And that's kind of the other thing Blazers Nation is trying to handle is just we don't know. The uncertainty moving forward. Art, you mentioned this. There's really only one other injury that we've all remember that we can look back on, and that was Paul George in 2014.
Yes.
It took him about 8 months to recover after his leg fracture there. If Nurkic can do the same, what do you think this team could potentially do next season? Or Nurkic himself? It's probably more about him than the team.
Yes, and I think part of what to remember about Paul George is he came back after 8 months. He got back on the court. It was like February. It was late in the season. He played about a half a dozen games. It was because he wanted to get back.
Yeah.
He was committed to getting back in that season. He played about a half a dozen games, and then they pulled back from that.
Yeah.
He didn't really play a lot. Averaged maybe 8 points, close to 9 points a game. Pulled back, and then in the fall he was more ready to go. And obviously now he's probably better than ever.
Yeah.
But you just don't know. Nurk is a very different body style.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about an enormous man.
7 foot 290.
And whether or not that'll play a role in it, I'm going to get the chance to talk to a doctor and a physical therapist about those kinds of things a little bit later today to see what their take is on that. Is it how? Hey, what works in his favor? Like you said, he's young. We know he works hard. And this is his job.
Yeah.
So unlike us, if something like that happened to us, well, we're still coming in here to do these kinds of things, and we stuff in a little bit of rehab along the way. We go to rehab we go to the physical therapist once a week. They give us the exercise, and then it's on us to do them. Well, he's going to have someone with him every step of the way, monitoring this. So that will help.
I think as far as how it will impact the team, I mean, best case scenario would put him back
early December.
Yeah, early December, Thanksgiving or Christmas. I think that in the same way that Damian Lillard said of C.J. McCollum's injury, that he was basically, his mindset is that McCollum won't return in the regular season this year. I think that the Blazers need to have the same mindset with Nurkic, that he might not return next season.
Right.
Or if he does, it would be at the very end of the season.
No.
And I think they have to prepare for that because other players are going to have to step up in his absence. And to the Blazers' credit, when C.J. McCollum got hurt, I think that we were all looking at that as they don't have anyone who can replace what C.J. gives them. And in the past 4 games, you've seen from Seth Curry and Rodney Hood that they have been able to replace that production and still play well. We'll talk about this a little bit more about whether the Blazers have the personnel to do so. It's really hard to replace what Nurkic provides, but the Blazers have to look at this as they can't be waiting for him to come back and hoping that he'll be back by Thanksgiving or Christmas. They have to prepare that he might not come back next season at all because we don't know how he's going to respond.
Right,
We have only Paul George's injury as a precedent for what Nurkic is going to be recovering from right now, and he is. He's a completely different body type. I mean, the one thing that Nurkic, I think, has going for him that you talked about is, one, he's young, and 2, he's a very hard worker. But even with both of those things, it's still completely unknown how his body will respond to all of this.
And you brought up CJ's injury. I mean, CJ's injury, I remember my initial thought about that was if it was severe, was the season's over.
Yeah.
But I didn't have this emotional connection with it. And I think that's where this injury with Nurk kind of took on a different level. It was so gruesome that there's something instinctually in all of us that make you feel for the guy. And it wasn't about the Blazers season at that point.
No.
And we'll get to that point eventually, but still about him, as a human being.
Exactly.
How is he going to how is he going to respond?
Yep.
How's the support system going to be around him?
Sure.
How is he going to be when he actually does recover? All those questions come to mind. The support system, it sounds like he's got a really good one in place. It sounds like all his teammates love him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think there's no doubt about that, and he'll certainly have the support of the team. I also wonder if it'll impact the way they handle CJ going forward the rest of the season. If you look at it and you say, okay, we knew that they wouldn't rush him back anyway.
Right.
But you wonder if maybe it'll impact that even a little bit more now that they know, okay, we've lost Nurkic for the season. So that kind of changes what our outlook is in terms of what we do in the playoffs. And do we hold back and be a little more conservative with CJ? Because the last thing we need is to have another guy with an injury that is a long-term kind of thing.
It could go the other way around, though, also. Where this is a team that has been focused all season on putting the demons of the sweep last year against the Pelicans behind them and proving themselves in the postseason. And just because Nurkic is gone, they're not going to give up on that at all.
No.
And so I understand what you're saying,
right.
100%, and that could be a route they take. But I think there could also be it could go the other way where they realize CJ and the team realizes they need him now more than ever, and maybe he feels a little more pressure to come back earlier. And that kind of leads us into, the last part we're going to talk about here on this podcast, and that is the Blazers did clinch a playoff spot last night, even though it didn't feel like that. What is their playoff outlook without Nurkic? How do you think this team is going to respond?
They're still in 4th place.
Yes.
They're a half game behind the Rockets. They have a pretty good lead right now in front of the teams that are chasing them.
2.5 games.
They have a pretty easy schedule. Their last 8 games is pretty easy. I think that they can still, even without Nurkic, I think that they can still probably hold on to that 4 spot.
Yeah, I'd agree. I immediately looked at the standings yesterday to see where they were, what was going on around them. I didn't realize that Oklahoma City had dropped all the way down to 8. I knew
Yeah.
they had been losing, but I didn't know that. I think that they still have a good shot at winning a first-round playoff series. I think that Enes Kanter, with the numbers, with the amount of time he's going to have to play now, he's probably going to be averaging a double-double. On the downside, it's like the guy's allergic to defense.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that now becomes the problem for them in the short term. Okay, we've got a guy. It's good that they have a quality type player they can put in there, but they have to figure out if they can convince him to play at least a little bit of defense to help them out,
or figure out a way schematically what Stotts
to hide him.
To hide him, exactly. Because I mean, at this point, you can't always pair Collins with Cantor, which is what Stotts has been doing now.
Right, yeah. Jared had pointed that out to me and was talking to me about some of those numbers. And I mean, I guess in my mind I knew, Collins is helping him defensively, but I didn't know the numbers were that good. And now what do you do? Because you don't have a way to do that really at this point. And
this goes. Just thinking about the Blazers' playoff chances, the signing of Cantor becomes humongous at this point. We talked about his defensive liabilities, but he can score. He can rebound.
Yes.
He can at least fill those needs for the Blazers. And if you didn't have him, you would be relying on Zach Collins or Myers Leonard.
Right.
And you're still going to be relying on potentially both of those guys now. But at least you have a guy like Enes Kanter who has also been in the postseason, has some experience to help you try to get through the stretch. And as Jared pointed out with the McCollum injury, we have seen other guys step up over the past week. Seth Curry especially. Yeah. Rodney Hood, his playmaking abilities has gone to another level since CJ got injured. And so, like I said, this injury, it can unify this team. This team, I think, always kind of has an us against the world type mentality.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of the fact that they're in Portland and because of their past postseason failures. But I think they're going to have it even now. No one thinks they're going to get past the first round. Every team below them in the Western Conference right now
wants to play
aiming for that 5 spot right now because they want to play Portland.
They want to play Portland. Well, and you know what? I wouldn't want to play Portland. Because I think you're right. I think they're going to come together. I think they have a guy that they can put in the middle who can at least hold down a portion of that, and I think they're going to figure out a way to do it. I think they learned a lot from last year's playoffs. You know what? They understand that teams have a chance to scheme for you, to really plan for what you do, and that's what teams have historically done in the playoffs since it's been Dame and CJ. Yeah. Get the ball out of their hands, make somebody else beat you. Well, I think they're going to figure out a way to work their way around that, and I believe that they can get out of the first round of the playoffs. It was always going to be a challenge to get past the first. It was always going to be a huge challenge to win a second round playoff.
And the leadership on this team, I think, is there also. I mean, Damian Lillard. You talk about he's one of the top 10 players in the
best
NBA,
leaders in the league,
and arguably the best leader in the league in terms of what he means for a city and what he means for the team. That locker room, he is the voice of that locker room. And also Terry Stotts, the leadership he has shown he still has these guys' ears. They love playing for Terry Stotts, and I think the combination of those two will help the Blazers come together down this final stretch. What do you think, Jared?
I believe the Blazers will come together.
Yeah.
I don't think that they are going to win a playoff series now.
Yeah.
And my reasoning is I believe they'll come together and I believe they'll play well, but what they're going to have to do now is they will have to outscore whatever team they play.
Yes.
And their offense is very good. But without Nurkic in there on defense, the Blazers have been a very poor defensive team. And if you're replacing him with Enes Kanter, all respect to Kanter's offensive ability and his rebounding, that defense is not going to be effective. The only way I can see that changing in my mind is it is time for Zach Collins to step up and fulfill his potential as a former number 10 overall pick. Yeah. He needs to step up. He's played a little bit better recently. Yeah. We've seen it in that pairing with Enes Kanter, but I think if the Blazers have a chance of getting out of the first round this season, I don't think it's going to be because Kanter steps up in Nurkic's absence. I think it will rely on Zach Collins showing more than he showed up to this point in the season.
I'm with you on what you said about I do believe the Blazers will come together too. I don't believe they'll crumble here at the end of the season.
No, I don't think
There's too much leadership. I agree with you.
But I'm also with you that I don't see, even if CJ comes back, I mean, that's the other thing is we don't know.
If he's going to,
Even if he does come back, what percent, what type of CJ are we going to get? Are we going to get fully healthy, ready to go CJ McCollum? Are we going to get 75% CJ McCollum? And so for me, I'm with you. Even with a healthy CJ McCollum, I don't see the Blazers getting past the first round this year. And that was the injury itself. The first aspect of it was how is Nurkic doing? But there's so much trickle-down effect for not only this season, but for the franchise moving forward the next couple seasons.
I mean, this could impact the franchise for a decade.
Yeah.
If he's not able to come back and be at least close to what he is now, well, then it really just kind of throws them all off. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs next year.
Max is signaling at us here.
Well, we've got an update on Nurkic right now from Shams of The Athletic. He had surgery today for his fractures. And some positive news, no nerve or muscle damage in his leg.
Oh, good.
That's great.
So that's good to hear.
That is good to hear. Any positive news at this point?
Yes.
Good news.
So here's the one thing that's different for me now, and I don't expect the Blazers to win a playoff series. But I am not going to feel the same way about them losing a playoff series now than I would have otherwise.
No, the expectation...
And I think that the franchise will feel the same way.
Yes.
The expectations have completely changed.
Yes.
I mean, if the Blazers were fully healthy and they lost in the first round again this year, Terry Stotts is probably out the door.
I think so.
That's not going to be the case now.
No, I don't
if they
think
lose
so.
in the first round. There are other ramifications of that, which, I mean... You hate to say it, but could end up being blessings in disguise in a way.
I think it keeps the team basically what it is right now.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps them that way. I don't know if they can find another big guy that they can bring in that would be serviceable for them. I don't see that happening. I can't see Cantor staying around. They just can't pay him enough.
Not for what they can pay him.
No.
But I don't even know if he's the replacement you want for Nurkic anyway.
Yeah. You think he can learn to play defense in
No.
about a day?
No, sorry.
How old's Enes Kanter?
Yeah.
28?
He's set in his ways.
Not happening.
He hasn't figured it out in the first 20
I think he's figured it out. I think he just doesn't want to.
Max?
I don't think it's an effort thing.
Oh, man, I'm glad we're all smiling and laughing now here at the end of this podcast. Max, there's no rip it today. Sorry to say the podcast listeners. We know that's what you stick around to hear is rip it and Max Barr. There's no story time either. But I want to hear kind of just your thoughts about the Nurkic injury, how you took it in, how the last 12 hours or whatever.
It's been tough. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you guys have been talking about. The one thing I'll say is, the man is not dead.
Yes.
And the human body is an incredible thing. I think Art, you brought up, this is his job, and he's going to have a lot of help. And I think it's amazing what the power of positivity and just a positive outlook on things can do for someone who's coming back from something that serious. So, we all wish him the best, and I think before long we're going to start to get updates about this, and things will hopefully be looking better.
Yeah.
I think Dame needs to make sure he takes Dame Jr. to go see Nurk as often as possible.
That'll raise his spirits.
It'll be his most Instagram post, Dame Jr. with Nurk, an injured Nurk right now.
Yeah.
This was our podcast for the week. As we said, we weren't initially planning to do one, but given the circumstances of what happened,
we needed to be here.
The magnitude of it felt it was too important of a week to skip. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure to leave us a review, 5 stars, leave comments. Art, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Art. You're welcome
next
anytime.
time, I hope it's a happier subject.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome anytime you want to come on this podcast. I know it's not always the best of days when we usually do it for you, but at least we got you in on this one. And we'll talk to you in, 9 days? Hopefully the Blazers have a few more wins under their belt. We'll know a little bit more about Nurkic, and I'm sure it'll be a more optimistic podcast than what we just had. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.